Hello class, this is a overview video which I'm taking from one of my PowerPoints, and the PowerPoint is also in this course shell if you'd like to make a copy of it and write notes, or you may want to use it for the quiz that is due for this week as well. So first of all, this is called WRAP and ICE, and I'll go over what the acronyms mean as we go through the presentation. So here is what I want you to do. You'll need a piece of paper, or you can write these right on the PowerPoint slides, or you can do it in your head, whatever works. Instead of having a pre and after, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the questions now, write your answers down, and then after I go through the presentation, or while you're going through the presentation, correct yourself or write the proper answers down, because you'll need these for the quiz at the end. Now this does not count as a grade, but it is going to count as a grade in the course shell. What you do now won't be graded. This is just for you. This is your learning tool. So here you're going to go through some questions. I'll read them and I'm going to go through quickly. If you need to stop, just pause and then you can continue. So question 1. Your essays can be made up or can consist of 30% of direct quotes, which means that if you're making a 7-page paper, 30% would be 30% of that 7-page paper could be direct quotes. Yes or no? Next, it is all right to drop a direct quote into your paragraph without introducing it. You're writing an essay, you pull a quote from someone you want to use, and you just drop it into the essay. Is that proper to do? Yes or no? Number 3, a paraphrase is usually a lot shorter than the original passage of information or the information you're trying to use. And it gives the big picture, it gives the big ideas. So this is a paraphrase. Is this the correct definition of a paraphrase? Yes or no? Question 4. Of the 3, you have a summary, you have a paraphrase, and a quotation. Which ones need a parenthetical citation? Which ones need an in-text citation? So you can look at A, B, C, D, or D, or excuse me, A, B, C, or D, all of them. If you don't know, watch the video and you will know. Assessment question number 5. A summary is or almost the same length of the original passage of information. It usually just covers the main ideas. It covers the main ideas. Yes or no? Is this a definition of a summary? Number 6. When you are paraphrasing, it is acceptable to use some of the original author's words as long as they are in quotes. So if you're going to paraphrase, you're going to write something, and if you want to bring in some of the author's words directly from the original source because they're so good, it's okay in a paraphrase as long as you put quotes around those words that you use exactly. In the WRAP acronym for creating a paraphrase, the R stands for to rehearse, to rule out, to read, or to remember. Take a guess now, and after you watch the video you should know the answer. Next, question 8. In the ICE acronym, the letter I stands for to introduce, to include, italics, or to insert. Again, if you're not familiar with ICE, you will be after you finish watching the video. Question 9. Is this a good example of how an in-text citation could be introduced and cited? So example we have, Smith states, comma, this book is terrific. Notice where the quotation marks are. And then we have the parenthetical citation. This means it came from page 102. And then the period comes at the end. Is this correct? Was this introduced properly? And then number 10, true or false? Was this one done correctly? Was this one introduced? Was this quote introduced properly? Piercy ends the poem on an ironic note, colon, and then the quote, to every woman a happy ending, quote, page 25, period. Would this be a good way to introduce this quote? Okay. These are the questions. These are the look for the answers as you go through the rest of the presentation, and pause as much as you need to. So let's go to the actual presentation now. Okay. Why do you need to cite or to introduce or any outside sources? Because you don't want to plagiarize. Plagiarizing is stealing. If you use anything outside source, if you quote it, if you paraphrase it, or you summarize it, you must cite it. If you don't, it's plagiarism. And plagiarism will get you a 0 in my class, and it can also get you kicked out of college. So we know what while we're doing it, but when do we cite? So what I'm going to do is talk about citing using a direct quotation, paraphrasing, and summarizing. All three, again, you must cite them. Okay, what's the difference between a quote and a paraphrase and a summary? A quote is word for word. You're taking the exact same words out of the outside source you're using. Paraphrasing and summarizing are very similar. They both use your own words when you're paraphrasing. And again, if you're paraphrasing, you're using your own words. However, if you want to include some of the words from the original source word for word, it's okay. You put them in quotation marks. And then a summary is very similar to a paraphrase, but a summary, you're giving the big picture, the big ideas, whereas in a paraphrase, you're giving the main ideas. So let's go through, let's continue. Here's a paraphrase example. You can read this, but my point here is this is the original. This came from the source. And where did we get this? From Writing Research Papers, the book, and the author is Lester James D. Here's the original. You decided that you wanted to use it, so probably only about 10% of your final paper should appear as direct quoting. I think 20 is good. I'm okay if you go up to 20% in my class, but do not go to 30%. That's way too much. Writing is your own words and using other people's sources to support that, not the other way around. So here's the original. Here's the paraphrase. The paraphrase is usually very similar to the length of the original. And the reason you're paraphrasing is because you want to use your own words because it will mesh better within your own writing because you can set your own tone. And if you notice, I'm giving Lester, who is the author, credit, and I found this on page 46 to 47. So this is a paraphrase. It's not a direct quote. It's almost the same length. I'm giving the main ideas and then I'm moving on. The guidelines for the paraphrase. Make sure you read it, understand it, write down the main points. When you're writing it, you want it to be similar, but use your own words. If it's too much like the original, you're still plagiarizing, so be careful there. You can pause and read over the rest of these if you wish. Okay, RAP is a mnemonic. It's a paraphrasing strategy. The R is you read the original first, then you ask yourself, A, what are the main points, and then P, you put them in your own words. You put the main ideas in your own words. So if you're going to paraphrase, remember RAP. Read it till you understand it. A, ask yourself what are the main ideas. And then P, put those main ideas in your own words. And yes, you must cite it. Where did the information come from? Here's the summary. The summary is similar to a paraphrase. Again, I'm using the same Lester James, the same 10% of your final paper. This time the summary is a lot smaller than the original because I'm giving the big idea. I'm not really giving all of the main ideas. And again, Lester, page 46, 47, we have to cite it. So the original, the summary's a lot smaller. We're giving the big ideas. Whereas the paraphrase was similar in length because we're giving more of the main ideas. The clue or the key here is a summary and a paraphrase are both in your own words. This next slide gives you guidelines to follow if you're going to summarize. You can read the PowerPoint or you can look at this video and pause, but I'm going to continue. Alright, when to quote. Usually you really want to summarize and you want to paraphrase more because you're putting it in your own words. That way it meshes better with the overall paper, the feel of it. However, sometimes if you're going to quote, you want to use the direct quote because it's very strong, and putting it in your own words may lose some of its power. So what we're going to do is look at the example of a direct quote. This came from our book, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, or a novel that you read in one of my English classes. And here, we start with a quote, we end with a quote. And notice that everything in this quote it comes word for word from the novel, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And who is the author? Angelou. We found it on page 9, and then the period comes at the end. Let's continue. Guidelines for quoting. You can read these over, but the point is, use exact words, put quotes around it. And here again, do not include too many quotes, 20% or fewer. I said this earlier, do not use 30% of quotes. Do not string quotes together. The quotes are to support you, not the other way around. Okay, let's go. Let's continue. Here is an example of someone who used too many quotes. In this paragraph, this student used 1, 2, 3 quotes back to back. That's called stringing quotes together. That's not right. She needs to explain these quotes. How do they work? She's using quotes to write her paper when she should be using her own words and then using the quotes to support her. So that was an example of that. Here, what I've done is, I put the original that we used before for the paraphrase and the summary. If you look here, Lester 466-67, this was the original, but we decided that it was so good we're just going to quote it directly. So we put quote, quote. However, if we want to paraphrase, we get rid of the quotes and we write down the main ideas. And then if we don't want to directly quote the original, we summarize, give the big picture. But notice, direct quote, author, pages. Paraphrase, author, pages. Summary, author, pages. Everything that you borrow from someone else, even if you put in your own words, must be cited. Okay. I'm going to skip this. Alright, no, I'm going to skip that. Sorry about that. I want to jump to the ICE overview. Now, many students will have a direct quote and then they just drop it into their paper. They don't introduce it at all. It's choppy. It's jumpy. It's like watching a movie and you go from one scene to the next without transitioning well. So the acronym ICE means to introduce the quote, you're going to cite the quote, and then you're going to explain it. Do not drop your quotes in. So let's go through the 5 ways. Well, actually, here are the 5 ways, but I'm going to go through each. So you can look at this, but I'm going to jump ahead and I'm going to go over each of these individually. So you can use a full sentence followed by a colon to introduce a quote. Take a look here. The setting emphasizes deception. If I stopped here and put a period, this is a full sentence. It's beautiful. It's an independent clause. But I can put a colon here instead of a period and then start the quote. Here, Piercy ends the poem on an ironic note. Period. It's a full sentence. It's an independent clause. But instead of putting the period, I put a colon and then I put in the direct quote. And it's the same thing. If you have a full sentence, a complete sentence, get rid of the period, make it a colon, and then add the quote after. That's the first way you can do it. Number 2, incorporate it within one of your own sentences. Hamlet's task is to avenge A. They would be my own words, and then I add the quote after. I mesh it well within my own words. Another way you could do this is, according to Smith, according to Angelou, in Angelou's words, in Howell's words, comma, 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 and then introduce the quote. Have the quote here. Next, these are just other ways to say it. Instead of saying states, remarks, you can write notes, comments, observes, concludes. But notice that they all have a comma, and then you go into the direct quote. Here, if you don't want to use she states, he states, you can say that. Smith argues that. Howell argues that. If you're using that, it takes the place of the comma, and then you add the direct quote. So I've just given you the 5 ways how to introduce. So you introduce the quote, give the quote, you cite it, and then you're going to explain it in your own words. So I want to go back to here. Smith points out that millions of students would like to burn this book. Oh, excuse me. Okay, sorry about that. My dog barked and scared me. It's life. We'll move on. So again, as I was saying, ICE, introduce. Smith points out that. We introduced it. Cite, give the quote. Millions of students would like to burn this book. We're going to cite it. We know that it came from page 53, period. And then the author would go on to explain it and say, this means that students disagreed, or in other words, or explain what the quote means to you in your own words. So again, ICE, introduce it. I showed you 5 different ways. Cite it. Put your parenthetical citation. In the MLA videos that I have, you will see part 1, 2, and 3. They will go over more detail of how to cite different, like an article versus a book versus a database. And then you want to explain it. How does this work? How does this quotation fit into your paper? Make it mesh well. Okay, that is the presentation. Watch the video again if you need to, but don't forget to do the quiz for this week. Thank you.